Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Sometimes life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. One moment you're quiet every day, routine, and the next moment someone from your past shows up at your door, carrying memories you thought were buried forever. That's exactly what happened to me on what started as the most ordinary Tuesday afternoon you could imagine. The golden afternoon sunlight was pouring through my kitchen window, the kind of warm, honey-colored light that made everything in our small garden look magical. I was standing at the counter, humming along to an old song playing softly on the radio. The smell of rosemary and herbs from the chicken roasting in the oven was already starting to drift through the house, making everything feel cozy and perfect. My husband Mark had been married to me for 32 wonderful years. And right now he was outside in our backyard. I could see him through the window, bent over that stubborn rosebush he'd been fussing with for months. Every spring he tried to make it bloom, and every spring it seemed to fight him back. But Mark never gave up on anything, especially not his roses. It was one of those comfortable, peaceful Tuesday afternoons that wrap around you like your favorite old blanket. It's the kind of day where nothing exciting happens, and that's perfectly fine. I had no idea that my comfortable little blanket was about to be pulled away, gently but completely, changing everything. About an hour before David arrived, a phone started ringing from the den. I heard Mark's heavy footsteps as he walked over to answer it. His voice became a low, muffled sound that I couldn't quite understand from where I stood in the kitchen. I kept cooking, not thinking much about it. We've got calls all the time, telemarketers, neighbors, our grown children checking in. But when Mark walked back into the kitchen a few minutes later, something was different about him. There was an odd expression on his face that I'd never seen before. It was a mix of complete surprise and something else, something deeper that I couldn't figure out. His eyebrows were raised, and he had this half smile that looked both confused and excited. "That was David," he said, leaning his shoulder against the kitchen counter and crossing his arms. "David?" I repeated, setting down my wooden spoon and turning to face him completely. Now, that was a name I hadn't heard spoken in our house for, goodness, it had to be close to 20 years. David Miller. Mark's very best friend from their college days. His partner in all those crazy, youthful adventures that Mark would sometimes tell me about late at night, his eyes getting that distant, nostalgic look when he remembered being young and fearless. Those two had been absolutely inseparable back then. They did everything together, studied together, played sports together, got into trouble together, and probably got each other out of trouble just as often. But then, as it happens so often in life, the years had slowly pulled them in completely. Different directions. People grow up, move away, start families, build careers, and somehow the friendships that once seemed unbreakable just fade away. David had packed up his life and moved out to the West Coast years ago. I think it had something to do with computers and software, some kind of technical job that Mark never fully explained to me. At first they had tried to stay in touch. There were phone calls every few months, Christmas cards, maybe a letter here and there. But as more years passed, those calls became less frequent. The cards stopped coming, and eventually, David Miller became just a name from the past, a character in Mark's old stories. "David Miller," said again, wiping my damp hands on my flowered apron. What in the world did he want? Is everything okay? Mark's smile grew wider, spreading across his entire face. "He's in town," he said, and I could hear the excitement building in his voice. "Just for a couple of days," he said. "Some kind of business trip. He asked if he could come by tonight. Said he'd really love to see us both tonight." I glanced quickly at the oven, where my chicken was cooking away, then back at Mark. Well, that's certainly a surprise. It's a good surprise, of course, but still. My mind immediately started racing in a dozen different directions. 20 years. What would David look like now? Would we even recognize each other? Would he recognize us? I had this clear picture in my memory of David as this tall, skinny young man with lots of energy and a laugh that could fill up a whole room. He had this messy brown hair that never seemed to stay combed, no matter what he did to it. But what I remembered most about David was how kind he had always been to me. Even back when Mark and I were just starting our relationship, when we were still figuring each other out and going through those earliest, sometimes difficult times that all couples face, David was always gentle and thoughtful. He never made me feel like I was intruding when I joined Mark and his college friends. He always made sure I felt included and welcome. He said he wouldn't be able to stay for dinner, Mark continued, noticing how I was already shifting into my hostess mode, mentally planning what I would need to do to prepare for a guest. He just wants to say hello, maybe sit and talk for a little while, have a quick drink. He's got to leave early tomorrow morning. Oh, well, that's fine then, I said, feeling my shoulders relax a little bit. The idea of putting together a proper dinner party on such short notice had made me feel a bit overwhelmed. That'll be really good to see him. Really, really good. And I meant it completely. There's something very special about people who knew you way back when you were younger and different. They hold a little piece of your personal history in their memories. They remember a version of you that sometimes you forget existed, and they can reflect back to you the person you used to be. It's the couple you and Mark used to be. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:15. Mark had just come inside from his evening battle with the garden. His cheeks were flushed pink from the fresh air and physical work. And there was a streak of dirt across his forehead that made him look exactly like the young man I had fallen in love with all those decades ago. I had quickly changed out of my cooking clothes and into a comfortable knit dress that I thought looked nice but not too fancy. I ran a brush through my hair, checking myself in the hallway mirror, and put on just a little bit of lipstick. It seemed like the right thing to do for such a special occasion, even if it was just a quick visit. Mark walked to the front door and opened it wide. I stayed back a few steps, suddenly feeling a little nervous and excited at the same time, watching. As he greeted our unexpected visitor, the man standing on our front porch was definitely older now, of course. The tall, skinny frame had filled out into the broader build of a middle-aged man. The messy brown hair was now mostly gray and silver, neatly cut and combed. There were lines around his eyes now, but I was happy to see that most of them looked like laugh lines, the kind you get from smiling and enjoying life. But when David smiled, that big, warm, genuine smile, it was pure David Miller, exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. Maybe a little shy, maybe a little uncertain, but absolutely unmistakably him. Mark, you old dog. David's voice was deeper and more mature than I remembered. But it still had that same friendly, warm quality that it always made people feel comfortable around him. David, look at you. Mark practically pulled him into a big, enthusiastic hug, patting him firmly on the back the way men do when they're really happy to see each other. They stepped into our front hallway together. And David's eyes immediately found me standing there. "Sarah," he said, his smile getting even wider. "Wow, you honestly haven't changed a bit. Still just as lovely as ever." I felt myself blushing, a warm feeling creeping up my neck and into my cheeks. "Oh, you're being much too kind, David." I laughed. "You, on the other hand, look very distinguished and successful." "Distinguished is just a nice way of saying old, Sarah," he chuckled, stepping forward to give me a light, friendly hug. It felt comfortable and easy, not awkward at all. The years have a way of catching up with all of us. It was amazing how quickly the years just seemed to disappear. One moment we were three middle-aged people who hadn't seen each other in decades. And the next moment it felt like no time had passed at all. We all moved into our living room, settling into our favorite chairs. Mark went to the kitchen and came back with 3 small glasses of sherry, something we almost never drank, but that seemed perfect for a reunion like this. The crystal glasses caught the last rays of sunlight coming through the windows at first. We talked about all the usual things people discuss when they haven't seen each other for a long time. David told us about his business trip, his work with computers, the weather differences between here and the West Coast. We asked about his flight, how long he was staying, where he was staying. David asked about our children, and Mark and I proudly told him about their latest accomplishments, their jobs, their own families. We showed him some recent photos that we kept on the side table, pointing out grandchildren he'd never met and explaining who was who. He told us a little bit about his own life on the other side of the country. He mentioned that he was divorced, now no children of his own, and that he spent most of his time focused on his career. When he talked about being alone, there was a quiet sort of sadness in his voice. But he quickly changed the subject back to happier topics when the conversation turned to remembering the old days. That's when Mark and David really came alive. They started sharing stories from their college years, their voices getting more animated and excited as they remembered their fraternity, ventures, and all the trouble they used to get into. I had heard versions of these stories many times over the years, but hearing them told with both Mark and David present, both of them adding details and correcting each other and laughing, made the stories feel fresh and new again. I mostly just listened, smiling, and enjoying watching my husband reconnect with his oldest friend. Occasionally, I would add a comment or ask a question. But mostly, I was content to sit back and soak in the warm atmosphere. The room felt so cozy and welcoming. The setting sun was casting long golden shadows across our carpet, and the smell of the roasting chicken had now mixed with the faint, sweet smell of the sherry to create an almost magical, nostalgic feeling in the air. It was during a quiet moment in their laughter, when Mark had gotten up to refill everyone's glasses, that David turned toward me. His expression had changed, becoming softer and more serious and thoughtful. The light, jovial mood in the room shifted slightly, becoming something more intimate and personal. "You know, Sarah," he began, his voice noticeably quieter and more careful now. "There's something I've been thinking about telling you, or rather telling Mark while you're here for many, many years now." I felt a small flutter of something in my chest, curiosity maybe, or perhaps just a touch of nervousness. The way he said it, the sudden change in his whole demeanor, made me lean forward slightly in my chair, giving him my complete attention. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual, not wanting to seem too eager or worried. "What's that, David?" Mark returned from the kitchen at that exact moment, handing David his refilled glass and settling back into his own chair. Completely unaware of the shift in mood that had just occurred, David looked at both of us, took a small sip of his sherry, and prepared to share whatever secret he had been carrying for all these years, and looked from David to me, sensing tension in the air. "What's going on?" His brow furrowed a little. David took a slow sip of his cherry, his eyes holding mine for a moment before shifting to Mark. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, as if gathering his doubts, or perhaps his courage, the easy banter of a few minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a quiet anticipation that seemed to make the ticking of the grandfather clock in Thay Hall sound unusually loud. "It's about your early days," David said, his gaze no fixed on some distant point beyond Thuendo, specifically about something fathomed right before you to Goatseria something. I'm not even sure Mark fully understood the implications of Athtime, or maybe he did, and that's why I never said anything my heart gave. A little thump, our early days, that was a lifetime ago, a whirlwind of new love uncertainties. Youthful dreams. What could David possibly know then? I didn't, or that Mark hadn't. Sharetti glanced at Mark. He looked as puzzled as I felt, a slight frown creasing his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but David raised a hand, slightly a gentle gesture, asking for patience. "It involves a bit of a confession on my part, too, I suppose," David continued, airy little smile playing on his lips and looking back. "Sarah, knowing what I know about how things turned out for you two, well, it just feels like something you should know, something that might cast a different light on things, a different light on what things my Mindrust our past was, our past settled and understood, wasn't it? Or so I had always believed, the air in the room suddenly felt charged thick with unspoken words and the weight of years I found my Zell folding. My breath-waiting David set his sherry glass down on the coaster with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness off the room. He looked at Mark, first a searching gaze, then his eyes met Minikind and steady. Mark, do you remember that awful flu you had, I think it Wacid's winter of your senior year? You were completely knocked out for over a week, missed a bunch of classes. Exams looming. Mark frowned in concentration. Flee. Yeah, I think I do. It was a nasty one. Mom even threatened to drive down from Vermont to nurse me. Remember, Hetcha called lightly, but the sound was a little strained. He was clearly trying to understand where David was going with Thesey. Remember it well, David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, because you were supposed to be helping Sarah with something d'import to her. He turned to me. Sarah, Hugh. Probably don't recall this specifically, or maybe you do, but you were working on that big portfolio for your art history class, the one that was a huge part of your final grade. You'd mentioned to Mark and to me, because I was always around, how stressed you were about getting the research done, especially for that section on early Renaissance patrons. The Universal Library was undergoing renovations and half the books you needed were in offsite storage, almost impossible to access. Quickly, I did remember, vaguely at first, then with a growing clarity, that portfolio had been the bane of my existence for months. Professor Albrecht had been a stickler for obscure detail sand. I'd been desperate for a good gradato keep. My scholarship, I remembered Thepanic. The late nights, the feeling off by Goverweld. Yes, I said slowly, I remember that. It was a nightmare. I was so worried I wouldn't get it done or wouldn't do it well enough. David nodded. Exactly, and Mark, bless his heart, had sworn up and down he'd help you. He was pretty good at digging through archives. Much better than you were at the time, if you don't mind me saying. Sarah, he gave me an apologetic smile. I waved a hand, no offense taken. He always was more patient with that stuff. Well, David continued, when he got sick, properly bedridden, delirious half time, he was beside himself with worry. Not just about his own exams, but mostly about you, about letting you down with that research. I looked at Mark, a warm spreading through me. I hadn't known he'd been that concerned. Back then we were still finding our footing as a couple, weckered for each other deeply, but there was still that youthful self-absorption I often accompanies being 21. He kept muttering about it. David seed a faint smile on his lips in between moans about his head exploding. Sarah's patrons find the Medici letters. She fail. It was quite at the permanence. Mark looked a little embarrassed. I don't remember any of that. You wouldn't. David said you were out au fait. But here's the thing, Sarah. He couldn't do it. He couldn't help you. And you knew how much it meant to you. David paused and his gaze became more direct, more intense. So I did it. I blinkadoo. Did it? You did? What the research David sent quietly for the Renaissance of Prans. I spent 3 solid afternoons in that dusty annex they called the Overflow Library, chasing down those Abuska references. You needed. I even managed to charm that old battle-axe OFA librarian, Mrs. Henderson, into letting him into the restricted stacks. For Anne Horry stared at him completely dumbfounded. Henderson. She was legendary for her fierceness. Charming her was a feat worthy of a medal. You did that research for me. Well, for Mark. Roller, David said a little comfortably. He was so agitated I just wanted to calm him down, and honestly, I felt bad for you too, Sarah. You were always so kind to me, even when I was being a typical college woofball inside. Mark and I knew how important that portfolio is. I was trying to process this, remembered vividly now how a few days before the deadline, and neatly typed seat-off notes and photocopied pages had appeared on my desk in the little apartment I shared with 2 other girls. There was no name on it. I'd asked my roommates. I even asked Mark once he was vaguely coherent. Again, if he'd somehow managed it before he got sick. He looked confused and said no, he wished he could have. I just assumed one of my roommates had taken pity on me and maybe asked a senior student for help or that. I'd somehow misplaced my own earlier notes and rediscovered them. It was a mystery eventually shrugged off in their leaf of getting the section done and earning an A on the paper, and that secured Miss Scholarship. Those notes, I whispered Mizzos, barely audible, the ones that just appeared. That was you, David nodded, a slight flush rising on his own cheeks. Now, Mark, madam, swear not to Telenyan. Especially not you. He was still pretty out of it when I gave him Thestoff to pass on, but he was lucid. Inato. Be adamant about Theth, said. He said he didn't want you to feel like you owed him anything, or Thatha was trying to buy your affection, or some such noble, slightly dramaticlage boy reasoning. He just wanted you to have them to do well. He figured you to's assume he'd somehow managed to get him to you before the fever really took hold. I turned to look at Mark. He was staring at David, then at Mihai's expression, a mixture of astonishment and something else, a dawning recollection, perps. His face was slowly turning Arthur fetching. Shade of red. I honestly don't remember the specifics of telling you to keep it quiet. David, I remember you being there helping me out, but the rest is a blur bit. Sounds like something my young griverly earnest self would do. It was exactly what you did, David affirmatively, and I kept my promise for over 30 years. I kept it, but seeing you both now so happy, so solid, it just felt like a piece of your story. Sarah, that you deserved to know it wasn't just a booth research, it was about how much Heckard. Even then, even when he was too sick to say it or too well to Mark Tomek. A big deal of it. I felt the sting off tears in my eyes, my breath caught in me throat. It wasn't just the act. Off kindness immense as it was this selflessness behind it. The quiet protection, the fact that Mark had orchestrated this gesture, Afra found support and then erased his own part in it. Wanting no credit, only my success and peace of mind, and David Loyal. David had been the silent keeper of this secret, this beautiful selfless act for all these decades. The room which had felt warm and cozy moments before. I seemed to shimmer with an almost Tackard light, the everyday setting of our living room with its familiar furniturian photographs chronicling our life. Togger suddenly felt like a stage for a revelation of profound and quiet Love. Couldn't speak. I just looked from David's kind, slightly nervous face to Maya's bands, which was now a canvas of emotions. I was only just beginning to decipher. The air was thick, not with tension, but with a powerful resonating truth that had been waiting patiently in wings for its cue, and it had finally arrived, leaving me utterly, completely breathless. My gaze was locked on Mark High's eyes, those familiar blue eyes. That I knew as well as my own reflection, were filled with a complex mix of surprise, a touch of remembered embarrassment, and a deep, unwavering affection that made my heart swell. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, Azalant. Acknowledgement of the past David had just laid bare before us. His touch was warm, groundingy. I barely remember being that sick, let alone the details. Mark said, his voice a little rough. He looked at David, but I do remember you being a true friend, Dave. Always. And Sarah, he turned it back to me, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. I guess I wanted you to succeed on your own merit. I knew how capable you were. Didn't want you to ever think I wastering too. I don't know, manipulate things or make you feel ended. I finally found my voice, though it was shaky. Oh, Mark, never. I would have been so incredibly grateful. I was grateful to whoever I thought had left those notes. I squeezed his hand. That it meant so much. It wasn't just about the grade. It kept Miss Scholarship, sir. Without it, things would have been much shorter. I remembered the constant low-level anxiety about finances. Back then, the careful budgeting, the fear of not being able to continue my study as that anonymous help had been a lifeline. I hadn't even known I was being thrown her. By whom? David smiled, a soft, understanding smile. He was pretty damn Sarah, very noble in a slightly clueless 21-year-old kind of way. I think also didn't want you to know how much was already. Well, he guessed you're a between Mark and me. He was already head over heels, but he was trying to play it cool. Mark groaned goodnatudely. Was that That obvious tome, yes. David chuckled to Sarah. Maybe not quite so much. She seemed to have you own a bit of a string there for a while, if I recall. I felt a blush creep up my neck again, but this time it was mixed with a profound tenderness. Think of young Mark so deeply smitten, wanting to help me. So desperately Butalso, wanting me to shine independently. It was a portrait of him I hadn't fully seen before, a layer of his character that had been hidden for me all these years. It wasn't a grand dramatic gesture, but a quiet act of profound care and respect. And that somehow made it all the more meaningfully. Never knew, I said softly, looking at Mark. All these years you never said a word. He shrugged, a characteristic rest of his when he was downplaying examining. Honestly, Sarah, as David said, I barely remembered the specifics once. Eerie covered, and then, well, we had so many other things happening, didn't we? Life moved on. We fell in love. Really fell in love, got married, built a life. That one little incident, it just faded into the background. I guess it was just something I did, or rather something David helped do for the girl. I was crazy about it, wasn't? A little incident, Mark, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It was huge. It was foundational. It showed me. I shows me even now the kind of man you are, the kind of man you've always been. The setting sun was now painting the room in deeper hues of orange and purple. The earlier coziness had transformed into something richer, deeper, like the aged cherry in our glass asset. Felt as though a missing piece of our shared history had just clicked into place, illuminating the past, and in doing so, casting a new, more vibrant light on the present. David, bless him, seemed to sense it. We needed a moment. He cleared his throat gently. Well, I should probably think about heading off, but an early start, as I said. He stood up, and Mark and I rose with him. David, thank you, I said, stepping forward and giving him a hug, a proper one this time. Thank ye for what you did back then, and thank you for telling me. It means more than I can say. I'm glad I did. He said, his voice sincere. It always felt like a story that belonged to both of you. And Mark Heddard, to my husband, a mischievous glint back in his eye. You owe me one, a big one, for keeping all these years and forfeiting Mrs. Henderson's wrath. Mark Laud. A full, hearty sound that flooded the room. I absolutely do. Next time you're in town, dinner is on me, the fanciest place I can think of, and no talk of old library battles. I promise. They embraced. Again, the easy camaraderie of lifelong friends re-established. Yet subtly deponed be the evening's revelation. Mark walked David to the door. I could hear their voices a little quieter now as they said their goodbyes. The porch. I stood by the window, watching David's car pull away from the curb and disappear. Down the street, third tail lights shrinking into the twilight. The street lights flickered on, casting pools of light on the sidewalk when Mark came back inside. He closed the door softly and then just stood there for a moment, looking at Metha. Was a question in his eyes, of vulnerability that was incredibly endearing. Walked over to him, cupping his face in my hands. You, Mark Henderson, I said, my voice still trembling slightly, are an extraordinary man. He leaned into my touch, his eyes searching mine. So I'm forgiven for my youthful secrecy. Forgiven. A smile, tears welling up again. But these were tears of pure and unadulterated joy and love. There's nothing to forgive. It's a gift, learning this. Now, after all this time, it's like finding a hidden treasure in our own backyard. He wrapped his arms around me. Pulling me close, I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that had been the soundtrack to my life for over 3 decades. But tonight it sounded different, fuller, each beat resonating with a depth of love and commitment that I now understood had roots even deeper than I had ever imagined. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, the aroma of fennel, slightly over-roasted chicken forgotten, the silence of the evening wrapping around us like a warm embrace. The surprise of David's story had indeed left me breathless, but as I stood there in Mark's arms, what filled my lungs, what filled my heart, was an overwhelming snaz of gratitude. A renewed appreciation for the quiet, steadfast love that had been the bedrock of our lives all along. It was a reminder That sometimes the most profound declarations of love aren't spoken in grand pronouncements but are whispered in selfless actions hidden in the everyday fabric of a shared life waiting patiently to be discovered even decades later. And when they are, they have Thepawar to take your breath away all over again. The evening had started as a simple reunion. A casual visit from an old friend, it ended as a quiet testamento, the enduring power of unspoken love and the beautiful surprises that a long life lived together can still hold Iknu as. I held Mark tighter that this tree David's gift to us would become their cherished chapter in the story of us, a reminder that even after all these years there were still wonderful things to learn about the man I loved and that I realized was a truly incredible thing. The discovery wasn't just about a past event, it was about understanding the enduring consistency of its character, a quiet strength and soulfulness that had been there from start, a thread woven so deeply into the tapestry of our life. Toga Therret made me feel cherished, not just for woe I was now, but for the young woman I had been with, all her dreams and anxieties, and it made me love him, if it were even possible, more than